Dr. Mollie Marti with Resiliency Matters. This is where we take the resilience research and break it down into small bite-sized pieces that we can begin using immediately to strengthen ourselves and others. What if you could learn ways to design systems that strengthen the people within the systems? Would you spend the next 28 minutes with us? What if in the next 10 minutes you could learn a key factor in improving mental health outcomes? Would you hang out with us? Who is us? My other half today is Dr. John Lyons, a clinical psychologist and senior policy fellow at Chapin Hall. John is an expert on research methods and metrics, and his work focuses on the importance of communication within measurement. There are tremendous implications for education, mental health, human services, and others, and we are so very happy you're with us. Welcome, John.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So let's start with a little background. I am not going to cover your full bio, or there goes the half-hour show, but let's start with Chapin Hall. Where is it? What is it?
Yeah, so Chapin Hall is a policy group that's affiliated with the University of Chicago, and so what we do is we develop research and we support policy making to assist in the child serving system, where our focus is predominantly child welfare, mental health, and juvenile justice.
And your research is outcomes management framework. So let's provide some background there. What is this and how does it work?
Yeah, the basic concept of it is systems tend to become about systems, and so it's a lot about kind of who gets the money. And so what we're trying to do is make systems about our kids and our families. And so how do you actually make decision making so that's always in the best interest of children and families? Well, you have to measure and communicate the best interests of children and families. So that's what outcomes management is, a strategy to make sure that the best interests of our kids is always represented at all levels of the system.
And so you build that into your frameworks, and you have a lot of frameworks. We'll talk about those, but one of the most widely used, I think, is the one with kids. It's called CANS.
Yes.
Tell us about the CANS framework.
Yeah, the CANS is an outcomes management tool, so it supports that kind of philosophy of let's make our work about the best interests of our kids. And it's a organized strategy. It's an engineering solution, so the concept of the process of taking research and putting into practice is an engineering solution. So the CANS engineers our knowledge about the best interests of kids and families into a common assessment framework that we do collaboratively. And the CANS is very widely used now. There are statewide implementations in 36 states, and there are implementations now on every continent except Antarctica, which is, I'm not optimistic about that.
So you've covered most of the continents.
Pretty widely used, right? So it's a pretty commonly used approach now.
Okay. And beyond CANS, the focus on children, what are some of your other applications for these assessments?
Basically, what we're trying to do is use that information to guide effective practice. So we're doing a lot of work around how do you link an understanding, so you have a discovery process that's done collaboratively that you do with families and youth. And once you have that information, what are the most effective practices to help people change their lives in important ways?
So I know you have some in business, some for entrepreneurs, just a wide variety of.
Yeah, there's a thing that we've developed called the Readiness Inventory for Successful Entrepreneurship. It's called the RISE, which is how do you help entrepreneurs develop their capacity. There's a version that's for med-surg patients that's used pretty widely in Europe called the InterMed. So there's a family version called the FAST, Family Advocacy and Support. There's a version for adults called the ANSA. So there's a lot of different applications of this same basic philosophy of creating a common language communication strategy that's designed to be shared visioning, that's designed to be collaboratively.
Okay. A lot of acronyms.
A lot of
we
acronyms.
researchers do
Exactly.
that so well.
We need just acronyms and verbs. Don't we?
And so let's dig a little deeper into the outcomes management framework. So what are some of the pillars or the defining characteristics of this framework?
Yeah, so the framework I use, and not everybody uses the same framework, but the framework that I use focuses on three primary goals. The first is to be transformational. So in other words, we want to focus on helping people change. So it's not just what's their status, but how do you help people change their lives in important ways, and what does that mean for them, and how do you help them get to that point? So that transformational piece of it is one of the focus. The second, equally important, is the concept of collaboration. And so in a collaboration, if the collaborative is successful, then everybody in the collaborative is successful. So that's what a team is. If the team works together as a team, then the team wins, right? That's a common form of collaboration. And so what we're trying to do is extend that concept of collaboration to all aspects of the system. So if you're working with an individual child and family, then you need to engage them in a collaborative process so that everybody gets on the same page. So the way we do our assessment process is a shared visioning process. So it's not an expert's opinion, it's a conversation that results in a shared visioning approach to, are we all on the same page? This is what's going on with this particular child and family circumstances. So that collaboration at the child level is called engagement. At the program level, that's called teaming. Because what you want, if you're working with a team of professionals, you want that team to be all on the same page. And so that's also collaboration, right? It's the same concepts, different language, but the same idea. So we're working on how do you extend that collaboration then to the team level. And then when you move up to the system level, you would like our government to be collaborative, right? And so the different sectors of the system need to learn to work well together. So that's called system integration. That is also collaboration. And it's actually exactly the same concepts as working individually with a child. So we're just trying to take that concept of good teamwork and build it in as a standard practice across the entire system.
Okay. So transformational, collaborative, and then outcomes
Then management, right? And the management is the most challenging because that's actually teaching people to use information to guide decision making. And so ironically enough, that takes some time. We do a lot of, particularly in mental health, we do a lot of intuitive-based decision making. And so this is a different approach. This is a information-based decision making. Now, it's completely clear that if you use information, you end up making better decisions, but learning how to do that is a little bit complicated. So that management piece of it is the third pillar.
Okay. And this is a strength-based framework, as you said.
Absolutely, because strengths end up actually one of the most important aspects of good outcomes management work. So, because frequently you don't really see the impact on needs. Oftentimes people have needs for an extended period of time. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not happy, healthy, safe, able to pursue their dreams. And it's really about strengths, which is a meaning-making aspect of this kind of work.
Perfect. And that takes us to your takeaway. Tool number 1 is that in mental health interventions, capitalizing any person's strengths can help achieve better outcomes. So whatever hat you're wearing today, whether it is a researcher, but a parent, a little league coach, a partner, a boss, if you're trying to help another transform their life, focus on strengths. How does resilience fit into this discussion on outcomes management when we come back? I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with John Lyon, Senior Policy Fellow at Chapin Hall. And we were just talking about your framework being
part of it. And since we use the information to help evolve the practice, we're always looking at the relationship between different characteristics. And one of the things that we're finding in our collaborative is that strengths are probably one of the most, if not the most important aspects of successful personal change. So it's a transformation. That transformational component of the work is really driven in large part by either having strengths and using them or building strengths. And so we're spending more and more time on that because that ends up such an important part of helping young people. So a lot of times young people are going to learn to live with their needs, but the way you learn to live with your needs is by developing strengths and learning how to use those strengths to help you overcome adversity. Mm-hmm.
And this makes perfect sense to me, maps onto our work in resilience being
Sure.
an asset-based or strengths-based approach. How do you see resilience fitting in with your framework?
Yeah, we sort of struggle with that because if you look at actually the dictionary definition of resilience, it's like learning to overcome adversity. And so when you're working in a service system, so people are coming in and you're trying to help them change in some ways, it sort of limits how you can use the concepts because you can't really I mean, one of the great things, for instance, about athletics is that you challenge people, and they learn to overcome challenges, and that's the great thing about playing sports is that you are faced with adversity and you learn to overcome it. So that's a natural resiliency building. You can't do that with trauma, right? You can't say, okay, we're going to teach you how to overcome this horrible thing that happened to you by having another horrible thing happen to you, right? So it just simply doesn't work. So we had to move to a somewhat different way of defining resiliency, and so that's why we use a definition. And actually, we built on a work by Mike Unger and his colleagues in Halifax, and we use a three-level definition of resiliency. So to be resiliency in our outcomes management framework is you have strengths, you recognize those strengths, and you use those strengths to promote healthy development. So you know your parents love you. You know, if you have a problem, you can go and your parents will help you out, and you do that when you're faced with a challenge. Or say you're deeply religious, you're spiritual, you pray, you meditate, you chant, whatever. And when you're faced with an opportunity or challenge, you do that. That helps you make a better choice. So that's resilient. You have a strength, you recognize it, you use it. You're struggling in a class. You know that your teacher, if you go after class, will help you, will sit with you and help you work through the challenges that you're having, and then you'll pass the class. That's resilient. From our definition, you have a strength, you recognize it, and you use it to promote healthy development.
And there's components of trauma-informed care that are being woven through that as well.
Absolutely, right? Because one of the ways that kids can overcome, significant adverse life events, trauma, is by identifying and using their strengths, right? Because, and we're increasingly thinking that actually talking about bad things is not all that helpful. Finding alternative things to do with your life that are completely different from that, that's actually helpful. So we're sort of moving in a different direction than traditional kind of mental health interventions where, tell me about your problems kind of discussion, because we're not finding that particularly helpful, particularly with young people. What's more helpful is giving them skill sets to live their lives fully. And so that's a different kind of frame.
And that's an important takeaway from your research.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else from your research that you want to share top of mind before we move on?
Well, I think the other thing that's really important is maintaining strengths, right? Is that, you have using strengths is one thing, and sort of the traditional way people have talked about strength-based systems is using strengths, but building strengths is equally important, maybe more important. But the third and kind of forgotten characteristic of a strength-informed system is that kind of learning how to make sure you maintain strengths while you're still addressing needs. And I think that piece of it is a really important take-home from the research, because what we're finding is there's certain kinds of interventions, like, for instance, pulling a child out of school for counseling in the middle of the school day might not be a great idea if that's disrupting that child's education, because maybe they're a good student and actually disrupting their education is worse than actually them having an opportunity to talk to somebody. So how do you actually maintain their strength, their academic, their love of learning while still addressing that need? So figuring out how to do that is actually fairly complicated. I think that's probably been the most surprising thing that we've seen.
And I think that it takes, if you're talking public health, you kind of have that maintenance phase built in. We know that we need that.
Yeah.
Or if you think of maybe before, during, and after trauma. But you're really kind of taking this down to say, okay, parents or teachers or, that you can help build and address the situation, but that child will need supports to continue
Absolutely
on
right.
that path to success.
The other thing that we're finding is it doesn't actually matter what the strengths are. That it appears that strengths are pretty interchangeable. Now, having a family that loves you, probably the most powerful strength, and probably not so interchangeable, but almost every other strength, whether it's having something you do really well, or being involved in a church, or having a vocational interest, any of those things are pretty interchangeable. So it's almost like Bruce Perry's, if you have one person that cares about you, that's the most important thing. If you have one strength that you can build on, that may be the most important thing. So finding what that is, right, it seems to be a really important thing for young people. What is that one thing?
Because those things are all working to build self-efficacy, build purpose, build meaning, build engagement. They all kind of get you to where you need to be.
Right.
Okay, so let's talk about measurements, one of your areas of expertise. What are some challenges, and I know there are many, that you see in the area of measuring resilience?
Well, one of the most interesting ones, at least from my perspective, has been the fact that, people who work with kids, I mean, they're really good people, right? There's some really, really phenomenally good human beings who dedicate their lives to the well-being of children and families, but they try to be nice. And so sometimes they feel it's somehow mean to people to not say they don't have strengths, and that somehow strength has gotten morphed into saying positive things. And that's not helpful at all, right? So, I mean, I get it all the time now that I'm old and gray, and I'll be at the airport and somebody say, young man, come this way. I am not a young man, Calling me a young man does not make it so, right? In fact, calling me a young man makes it clear to me that I'm not a young man, right? So I kind of see through the line, and we do that with kids, right? We say positive things, but that's not actually helpful to people, right? Telling the truth is what's helpful to people, but helping, I think, people who work, dedicating their lives to helping kids and families, learning that you need to be nice, but you're not just saying positive things. You're actually being constructive. And sometimes that means pointing out when a strength is not there, because then you can help them build it. So one of the greatest obstacles we've actually faced in this work is dialing back that tendency to give everybody strengths all the time and say, no, let's actually be accurate in our understanding of what strengths are there and real and what strengths are not, because it's not necessarily kind to pretend people have strengths.
And so pairing this with the truth that everybody does have a starting point and has strengths, but it needs to be real, because those kids will know if you're just cheerleading.
Well, I would say everybody has the potential to have strengths, and the key is to find what those are and pull them out and help them develop it. And if you can do that, then you're doing an enormous service to that young person. But just saying, this is a beautiful piece of art. Maybe not. Maybe it's an extremely good effort, right? So starting with an honest appraisal and then working from there is really important.
Okay. So maybe not all the kids get ribbons or trophies. I think you can see some applications here. Here's your tool, because I think this also will help you in that idea of building a child or building another person's strengths. The definition of resilience within this outcome management framework, a person's ability to have strengths, recognize those strengths, and use those strengths to promote healthy development. So how can we build systems to help kids and others grow resilience? Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. We are talking today with Dr. John Lyons, Senior Fellow at Chapin Hall. And we've been talking about using, building, and maintaining strengths. And I'm finding it so helpful, as both the framework, but talking about these examples, because I know you're a researcher, but you spend a lot of time in communities and out in the trenches, as I call, or with the people who are in the trenches supporting them. So let's talk about some more examples. So starting with using strengths.
Yeah, so for instance, we had a young lady in our mental health juvenile justice program, and she had trained horses, and she'd had show horses, and she took them to state fairs and that kind of stuff. And then her family lost the farm, and they had to move into the city, or into a smaller town, and she couldn't raise horses anymore. It was just too expensive, right? And so she started hanging out with the wrong people and got herself in trouble. She got arrested. And so when we came in, we did the assessment. We discovered that she had lost that strength, right? We wanted to bring that back to maintain it, right? To reintroduce it, so we could use it. And so what we did actually is we bought her a show dog. And then we worked with her about how do you show a dog, because she can manage a dog in her house, she can't manage a horse. And so that's that kind of using a strength. And so once she had something that she could spend her time doing that was very positive, that she loved doing, then that would be the strength-based kind of approach. An example of a strength building is we had a young man, he was in a transition to adult program, and they're meeting with him and they're doing our process, trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life, and they ask him, what do you like to do? And he said, I like to hang out with my friends. Well, that's not really a strength unless you're making that stuff up, right? So they ask him another question, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but in his case it was spot on. They said, what do you like to watch on TV? It turns out this guy liked those testosterone-infused cooking shows, the oxymoron of competitive cooking, Iron Chef, Hell's Kitchen. Okay, well now you've identified something, right? And that gives you an opportunity to build something. So then what happened next is somebody followed up, which is really what this is about, right? They followed up, and you can help somebody. So they had somebody who helped him get into culinary school. You can get into culinary school no matter how derailed your previous academic experience is, because it's a different kind of learning. So 2 years later, he's got a centerpiece vocational strength just because somebody asked him, what do you like to watch on TV, and then followed up. So that's that strength building piece of it. The strength maintaining, there's a bunch of examples around hospital and resident, but I'll just use a personal example. So when I was a kid, I was a lousy baseball player, but my parents really wanted me to participate in team sports because they really saw it from that. This was pre-resiliency, but they saw it from that resiliency lens. He'll suffer, and that'll make him stronger. It'll build character, I think was the language of the time. So I had to do it, right? But I was bad, and I was very, very skinny, and I had no power, right? I couldn't hit. But I had a coach one year who I actually led the team in runs scored, but my batting average was 0, right? I never got a single hit the entire year. But what I was really good at is I could draw a walk and I could run the bases, right? And so my coach didn't try and get me to be a power hitter, right? He recognized what I did well and made sure I had those opportunities to do that, right? And so that's not building a strength, it's maintaining a strength. And so I had an identity in the team because I had this skill set that was different than some of the skill set of my teammates. So I think having that kind of awareness of what kids do well and supporting them in what they do well and not trying to make them do something well that they don't necessarily do or want to do is really a key piece of that kind of puzzle.
Those are some great examples and applications to our viewers who mean, all right, I know you want us to build strengths. What does that look like? Those are very helpful. And woven through that, I can also hear your focus on communication within measurement. And one of our first discussions was, if you want just a set assessment, answer 10 questions, 20 questions, you have no time for that because your focus is asking those questions, connecting with the child or whoever you're assessing so that you can begin to identify those strengths. Talk a little bit more about your focus on communication.
So the concept of our approach is that the only reason why you actually measure in the child serving system is to communicate, right? So measurement comes from research, but it comes from the concept that you want to classify understanding. And so a researcher wants to understand a lot about a little, but if you're a helper, you actually need to understand a little bit about a lot. And so the definition of understanding, which is the foundation of a good intervention, right? So the first stage of any effective help is to understand. Well, the nature of understanding is different, and the only reason you're understanding is to communicate. So we design all our measurement strategies from a communication perspective. How do you optimize the communication value?
And I love that because, like I said, whether you're a researcher or not, that focus on communication is so helpful, even to parents and teachers. That's where it is, like connecting and communicating to kids. So here is your final takeaway. The pillars of a strength-informed system: using, building, and maintaining those strengths. Thank you for joining me and Dr. John Lyons on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.